years was what I spent with SAP in Singapore, covering covering and talking with customers in the Southeast Asia region, doing various roles, in the pre-sales space. And I look forward to connecting with all of you after the session. So over to you, Rohan.
Yeah, thanks, Naran. So, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rohan Desai. So currently, I'm leading SAP technology for Google Cloud India, and myself and Naran are a part of the same team. So, so this is also my 18 months in Google Cloud, focusing on SAP. And before joining Google, I was part of SAP India. So for over 8 years, I was in SAP, and I played multiple roles from development, modeling, as in the analytic modeling, and then cloud architecture. And so finally, I'm here in Google. So looking forward to get introduced to all of you, and as well as to see if I can add any value to your journeys going ahead.
All right,
Julien?
thank you. Yeah, thank you. I hope you can hear me very well. I'm not sure if my camera is going to be happy with me, but that doesn't matter as much. So hi, everybody. My name is Julien Delvat. I know Mukesh said it's hard to get to know people, but I really appreciate the fact that I can, I don't have to jump all the way to India or Singapore to do this session for an hour and a half and then go back home. So I'm calling you here from San Francisco. Hopefully the time is working for all of you. I have been with Google for 2.5 years now, working on our finance transformation project, and we'll go into more details here. I actually have 20 years experience in the SAP world. I started at SAP in France as a developer in finance, and then went into consulting based out of the US, but went all around the world in multiple industries, multiple countries, including India, not yet Singapore, though. We'll need to find a project over there. And got a reputation and an expertise around central finance, and also became a co-author of the first edition of the SAP Central Finance book. On this finance project, of course, it applies to Google, and you all know Google from all the products that you're using, hopefully all on a daily basis. All of those have, 1 billion daily users and more. So you can imagine the scale of the back office. But like Google, I'm pretty sure that your companies are more than one product. The solution we had to come up with had to cover not only Google, but the whole alphabet spectrum, which includes companies that do have a lot of revenue, like YouTube or Nest, the thermostats, and also companies that are still pre-revenue, or companies of all sizes, like Waymo being a self-driving car company, being obviously much smaller. Some companies having a lot of investment, like Google Fiber, so they do internet services. So you can imagine that the priorities of those different groups would be very different, and therefore we had to find a way to cater to all of their different needs. The problem in the finance area was that our costs were growing exponentially. You can easily imagine if your back office in finance is growing by 10% every year, the costs are going to quickly grow to an unmanageable level. In our case, it was really becoming an issue because it was slowing us down. And like a lot of companies in the high-tech industry, our goal was to go fast to market. And so what happened was that the infrastructure grew with leaps and bounds, with a very large number of systems that were not always connected together. So it was always hard to reconcile, company codes and cost centers and GL accounts and how different parts of the organization were treating different, elements in the finance area. So we needed to do something because what got us where we were was not going to get us where we wanted to be. So there was this call for transformation to reduce the friction, to really improve the return on effort, right? Get more output out of our people, being easier to manage and to reduce the risk, and still keep excellence at everything we're doing, right? So I think this is a picture that you probably see in a lot of areas, and hopefully not as bad in your organizations, but it's not that exceptional. So we had a message, a clear mission from Ruth Porat, our CFO. She gave us a 3-year objective that within 3 years, we will have even more useful and accurate data at our fingertips and the processes and technology to maximize business velocity and growth. And if you break down this sentence here, what you find here is all around data. This is extremely important at Google. This is extremely important at SAP. But you have to make it available and useful. This is actually Google's mission to make the world information available and useful. And how we do it is through processes and technology. Processes being something very a big quality of SAP, and technology being something that's a high quality of GCP. And why? It's about velocity, going fast, and growth, going big. So 3 years to do this was kind of a challenge, right? The vision is really to enable our finance Googlers, Finooglers, to deliver their best. So to enable them, their systems around them were restricting them. And to do that, we need to create an infrastructure to support Alphabet at $200 billion. What's interesting is that message was given to us in 2019 when we were $80 billion, and we are at 160 now. So we're pretty close to actually the 200 billion now. In terms of systems, what really mattered was integration. What we found out is that we had like 1,500 different boundary systems, not at all very nicely connected. So we spent a lot of time just putting them back together all the time. We wanted to get out of the box, so back to standard, so we don't have to do custom development, because what makes Google is new products on the market. It's not about how we file taxes, right? So let's get out of the box as much as possible, and then fewer systems, fewer moving parts, basically reducing complexity of the systems. In terms of processes, right? You cannot have system without processes. We want to have end-to-end automation and integration. Again, trying to be smooth, integrated across all systems to be more effective. Very, very high emphasis on data to have a single source of the truth at the right level of granularity and make it accessible to the right people as well. And in terms of operations, we want to reinvent the way we work. So a big aspect of change management, and we'll come back to that. As I'm going through the slides here, don't hesitate to, if you have questions, put them in the chat so that we don't forget them when we reach the end of the presentation. All right. So what was the scope? What did we have to do? Well, it was really about everything, right? So product areas are like divisions in the organization, right? So Waymo Verily had very special requirements. So how do we treat them differently? Started with our Treasury, which was one of the largest. Asset management was a project that we had prepared before. Our hardware or device and services organization has, inventory requirements. They have revenue revenue concerns. So how do we do that part of the world? This is very different than the technical infrastructure, which is a lot of procurement and assets and building the infrastructure. So, every one of those have very different priorities and different ways to solve them. But still, we want them to be integrated. So how do we, mitigate the two? Our finance core covers the whole, aspect of finance, standard GL, intercompany, cash, tax, FP&A. International for us was very, very important because our previous ERP system wasn't really delivering on that aspect. There was a whole shadow system going on. And then fixed assets and cost inventory was very important because of the volume, very simply. Source to pay, the whole procurement part had to be reinvented. Basically, the idea was to be able to start having, cash discounts, having more buying power in terms of, collecting and grouping orders. And international payroll. In the US, we were covered, US and Canada, but in terms of international payroll, we wanted to rethink the way we were doing it in 18 countries. Those are like the major pillars of our project. They all relied on some horizontal work streams. Change management, I started to mention, this is a very important topic for us. Controls, of course, together with security. Technology, which was really about how do we connect those systems. Data and reporting, and of course, international operations was also horizontal because it has an impact on all the other pillars. All right, timeline. we started from nothing. I think that's the key message here, is that when we started this project, we had 0 SAP, right? It was all in another system. So we had to start somewhere, and maybe in a weird way, we started with Treasury to get our feet in the water, if you will. That Treasury plus MDG were the first we started to put together to have something we can control that's manageable in terms of size, to get to know SAP on GCP, because we had no SAP basis people, we had no SAP developers or very little. So like, where do you start? You start with something small and then you expand. That's what we did in 2019. Then we started with our finance. Finance, the goal was to really change the system of record by our Finco Release 2. And we had a technical go live with Finco Release 1. I'll go back to that a little later. But you could see that we had a lot of phases between finance and our procurement and payroll, and then later some product area specific releases. All the way till actually last weekend was our device and services and finance release for 3.2. So we're almost done with all of our migration to SAP. All of that in really a year and a half. So that was quite a lot. I'm always struggling when I say it. That's a lot of work in a year and a half. Let's see now. Let's take the example of Treasury to see what that means. What are the volumes? What are we talking about here? So Treasury at Google is complex mostly because of size, and we wanted to automate and simplify all the processes and transactions in a controlled environment, because you don't really want to mess with cash, right? So we have almost 100 legal entity. We had dozens of bank accounts, $90 billion US dollars in cash, hundreds of billion dollars in notional functional currency, hundreds of billions of cash flow to handle in the project. So massive amounts, massive scale. And so how do we do, and how did we do it? The results here was really, the goal was to eliminate a key person risk. How do we reduce the risk? How do you reduce errors? And how do you basically reduce the manual processes? Because all of it was running on spreadsheets, or a lot of it. So let's try and remove that manual process so that we can remove the manual factor in the risk and in the errors. Also try to, instead of going to each bank portal, try to have a common framework for all of them. Then do end-to-end processes, right? So all on and on and on until we automate our cash position and improve our forecasting by legal entity. That was really the goal. And then we have now a more scalable operating model. So basically go from a very manual, very spreadsheet-oriented process, very high risk, very high effort, to an automated transactions and reporting, and that's scalable for the future. In the breakout session, I was talking to, I think, Ashok, who was saying, hey, we have this project and there's a lot of things, a lot of systems to connect, and where do we start? How do we go about it? What we try to do is reduce the number of decisions. So there was going to be a lot of decisions, and you need a lot of coordinations, but not 100% of everybody needs to work on 100% of the decisions. So we had a number of key design decisions, which is a document where you typically you collect the requirements, you define the stakeholders, you define the risk, and then you go about what are the options, considerations, pros and cons, and then you come up with a recommendation that you bring to a board. When you do that, what happens is that a subgroup can take care of it and then bring it back to the larger group for communication. So, and what also is interesting is if somebody comes in the project later on, they can just go back to the decisions and see, yes, we considered all the alternatives, and this is why we didn't go with option A and option B instead. So we had very different types of decisions in terms of BI. What do we do with our legacy system? Do we put everything in BW? Do we put it somewhere else? And I'll come back to that. our boundary systems, like what's the right level of granularity? How do we integrate them? In terms of consolidations, what's the master data? What's the model? And a number of decisions here on core GL, around the master data definition. That was very important, obviously. Around FP&A, like what's the allocation strategy? Which tool are we using? And then once we selected the tool like PaPM, how do we install it? What are the options? In terms of integration, in terms of intercompany, and then revenue accounting. So basically start listing all those decisions and then tackle them one by one as you go, with smaller groups, dedicating smaller groups for each of the decision, and then bring them back to the boards and then to the rest of the group. Overall, this is what we have set up. You could see the core was really S/4HANA, the on-premise version on the GCP. We use S/4HANA Public Cloud for Waymo and Verily. The idea is that we could, they have their own way of working, their own processes. It was a lot easier to keep them on their own separate ERP system and then integrate them to the main one. So something to consider. Of course, the cloud solutions like Ariba, Analytics Cloud, and Concur, all connected to our main system. And then we have a BW BPC system. What you see in gray are the things that we're going to have in the future, like revenue accounting or advanced compliance reporting, for instance. I frequently have the question, why BPC and not group reporting? Very simply, when we started the project, we felt like group reporting was not cooked enough. So BPC was robust, was reliable. So that's what we went with. And in the future, we might revisit the decision. But for the moment, this is what we have. Notice here, because this is the connector for Central Finance, and I will show you how we did. Right. So basically, we started with Oracle. 100% of everything was in one instance of Oracle. And in order to prepare for the technical go live that we had in January of 2020, we connected an SLT system to an S/4HANA box. And we also had the BW BPC, because really the core of our minimum viable product, if you will, was the ability to perform consolidation over 2 quarters. That's what we had to do. We also started to establish our BI framework around the GCP BigQuery, and I'll come back to the benefits of that, to connect to our boundary systems. So that was the initial system when we went live with the first release, phase 1, in February of 2020. Everybody was in Oracle, and all the transactions were replicating in all of the downstream systems. And we did that for 2 quarters because we had a lot of changes in the enterprise structure, a lot of changes in the processes. So we wanted to make sure that everything was running smoothly, and we did that for 2 quarters. That went very nicely. So we changed the system of record from Oracle into SAP in July of 2020. And this is when the core finance team moved out of Oracle into SAP, which means that all intercompany transactions, for instance, were done here, right? And now we started then the phase 3, which is all what's called the subledgers in Oracle, basically the migration of assets, inventory, AP, AR, and everything that was still performing in Oracle. We moved that into S4, and this is what we went live with our finance and technical infrastructure in May of this year, and our device and services team as of last weekend. So in the future, what we can do is turn off Oracle and then turn off the SLT system. Realistically, we might keep the SLT system because we might want to integrate with other systems. For instance, we just acquired Fitbit. So the question would be, do we integrate with BPC for only a consideration level? Do we integrate at an S4 level, or do we integrate at an SLT level? Now we have options, right? So that's something we might keep in our back pocket. But at least we can, very, highly reduce the sizing of that system and then keep it quiet, right? So this is described in the Central Finance methodology as the stepping stone to S/4HANA. You have a system, or many systems, that you connect through SLT. You start replicating this. What is called phase 1 is called central reporting. So all of your reporting can start coming out of your BW, BPC, SAC systems, while all of your operations are still in your source systems. And then you start migrating processes, or you can do it by company code, or you can do it by PA, product areas. But in our case, we did switch by core finance and then the rest of the sub-ledgers. All right. One of the key things that we had to solve, though, was the mapping, right? Because we go from an old world to a new world. In the old world, we talk about legal entities. In the new world of SAP, we talk about company codes. You go from chart of account to really a combination of profit center, cost center, GL accounts. You go from department to cost center. So really, this whole language dependency had to be resolved. There are a number of ways to do it. SLC actually has one way to do it, but in our case, what we wanted is to have many systems, and in both ways. So what we did is that we created our own mapper, which is really a custom application on top of GCP tools, where we could send data either through an API or through flat files, and then get them translated from left to right and from right to left. We went at the transaction level, we went at the planning level, and we went then at the reporting level. And we could do that with flat files or with systems to systems. So that is something that you might want to consider when you go from an old system to a new system. SLT is one great option to do it, but it's really mostly one way from old to new, and then from either SAP and non-SAP to SAP. Going back can be a challenge. So in our case, we had developed this. How to do that? Basically, you can rely on the SLT system. The SLT system from SAP has staging tables for external systems. So CF stands for Central Finance and E for external, right? So you can connect to that. What we did is that we hijacked this data transformation system, and we were calling our replicator to get the data in, and then we were, translating them before they get into the SAP system. That's really all standard that you can see here. The only thing we did that was different is push the rules into the data transformation system. So something to consider if you are considering Central Finance and SLT. Something that's also out of the ordinary. I don't know if you heard about this solution called PaPM from SAP. Profitability and performance management, I think. I always mix up the letters here, so don't quote me on it, but I think it's profitability and performance management. We use it extensively for intercompany transfer pricing and allocations. The idea is that this is a BW-based application that is an allocation engine. So we get the data from SAP for the actuals. We get it from other boundary systems for our plan, and we get drivers into the BW system, and then we crunch the number, and then you get the data back. This, in our case, was much more performant than all the other solutions that we have evaluated. So if you have never heard of it, I highly recommend you take a look. All right. Now, something that is very interesting for us. Right? As I said, we wanted to go back to standard, especially for the things that we're not unique, right? So booking an intercompany transaction is not something that will make us very different. However, our billing system is something that we believe is very important to us, right? Especially because we can deal with micropayments at scale like nobody else. So this green box here, the billing system, is our custom solution. We didn't want to touch it. The question is, what do you do with that data? Because you need some of it into your S4 system. Now, do you bring everything, or do you bring a piece of it? And if you do bring everything, that's going to cost a lot of money. And if you only bring pieces of it, then how do you reconcile it so that you can do a P&L? So what we decided to do is combine the SAP system with the GCP BigQuery system. So our billing system that has a lot of data, very granular, is only sending an aggregation of the revenue to the S4 system, just what we need to close the books. And that information is passed on to the BW system together with our cost at the granular level. And the very detailed revenue information gets passed on to the BigQuery system, and then they get merged again. So now we have in the BigQuery system the very detailed revenue information that you can slice and dice and drill, and you receive the cost that you can then map together. So you have a very detailed P&L without, the expensive part of the S/4HANA system, and still with the right level of information. So if you have never heard of the GCP BigQuery, I highly, recommend that you take a look and see what it could do for you by combining the options with the SAP solutions. All right, so what's the outcome, right? Well, first, standardization, right? That was a requirement. Standardize, 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 get back to out-of-the-box standard. So all of those processes that we've been working on, assets, FP&A, cash, and international controllership, AP, procurement, all of those are now following SAP standard processes, SAP standard system. So it's all good. The result is that we reduce our level of effort. Especially, we had a very high level of use on business process outsourcing. And a lot of what they were doing is really, connect to one system, extract data, connect to another system, extract another set of data, reconcile, find the differences, and then fix system A or system B. So like a lot of, required work, but that was not really providing a lot of value added for the overall process. It was really just patching our lack of integration and data quality. So that was very important to us. Then, because of that, we were able to reduce the number of manual steps and the effort for that piece of the work as well, right? So less systems, less integrations, better data quality, of course, your effort is going to be reduced. So we saw automatically some improvement, more granular and accessible data, of course, right? We have simplified the information, and now we're sharing the same data platform. Increase the end user satisfaction, especially around our finance community. Increase their productivity because they don't waste time on manual efforts and errors, and then tighter system integration. I think this is really the picture of what we should be trying to do in our projects. I'm coming back here to change management because this is something that is important. We know it's important. It's very hard to evaluate, at least, how hard it's going to be. And in particular for us, because we switch from one system to the other, from Oracle to SAP, from one language to the other, from processes to others, it was harder than we expected, let's be honest there. So the project required a lot more change management effort than we initially anticipated. So we enhanced the team. And usually when you do a CM, there's obvious stakeholders that you want going to take into account. The employees, all the finance people, obviously they're going to have to be involved. The project team, of course, is involved. But we also have indirect employees, right? If you think about it, Google has 120,000 direct employees, 130,000 indirect employees. I mean, those might not be the last numbers, but the idea is that we have more indirect employees, vendors and contractors than we do have, direct employees on the payroll. So very important to get them involved. Of course, we're changing the procurement system, so the vendors have to be informed, right? Because we're changing cost centers, we're changing company code numbers, so their invoices will have to change. So we need to get them involved as early as possible to say, hey, be careful. We're going to change a few things here, so let's get to know it. BPOs are business process outsourcing. Again, we had to rethink how they're working, how to make the best use of them. And something that was maybe not expected, like we didn't know how to hire SAP people because we had no SAP people, right? So think about it, like how do you differentiate an FI person from a CO person? Somebody who's a finance expert but has ECC expertise and not S4 expertise, like the recruiters couldn't make the difference between those different attributes. So we even had to get them up to speed. So you can think about it, that's a lot of people that had to be touched and upskilled and trained. So how we did it? Well, there was an internal website, created newsletters, internal trainings. We relied on SAP Learning Hub. Then we had a few on sites, and then we did internal training as well. Readout sessions were really critical. So the idea is, as we were going through the decisions, we had a number of days that were blocked to just read out those decisions. And then, a few points in the time where we did like snacks and facts. So, bring people together and then just see what's going on, what's going to change, what does that mean for me. So those were very, very important. I think we all know it's important. It's just very hard to evaluate and to put together. Okay, what's next? Well, we still have a number of things that we want to do in two main areas, right? The first one is about innovation, so technology side. I started talking about BigQuery. We have a number of things already in place, but we want to enhance it and then have self-service real-time reporting using this BigQuery system. We want to, what is interesting here is, once you go through such a project, you design with your, consulting partners, the perfect process, the ideal process, what we should be doing. And then you implement it in the system, you test it, it's all good. But then people start using the system, and of course, they're going to use it very differently, but it's very hard to know what's going on in the system. So we want to implement process mining, potentially also task mining, and then combine this with process automation. The idea is that as we go, let's say the whole intercompany process, we can identify what are the bottlenecks and how can we solve those bottlenecks with robotic process automation, artificial intelligence, or machine learning. And also to enhance the end user experience, maybe chatbots with Dialogflow. So those are the technology things that we want to do, but we want to apply them to processes. So for instance, journal entry analysis and prevention. The idea is that when we do have either integrations or manual entries, people still do make mistakes, right? So instead of typically using 100K, let's say they put $1 million because it's 1 0 different, and it's still within the boundaries of what's is allowed. The transaction can go through, and then it takes time to figure it out. And by the time you identify it, there might be data conversions or currency conversions, so it's hard to get back to it. So there's a number of tools that you can put together or on the system that look at transactions and say, typically every month you're putting 100K. This time you're putting $1 million. Are you sure you're correct? Or you can even prevent it or block it. So something that here would prevent errors as opposed to identify them too late. Same with forecasting and accruals. Those are very process-heavy tasks that we do very frequently. And if we can automate them and improve on them through AI and ML, that would be a big benefit. Fraud prevention and smart contracts are things that we are evaluating as well and see if they could be useful for us. All right. Now, we did benefit from a lot of co-innovation work with SAP, and we're trying to actually put it back in the community so that everybody can benefit from it. So for instance, the first release of SAP Treasury didn't cover hedge accounting. So we worked a lot with the SAP product management team to be able to get those features available, and it's now part of SAP Treasury. The integration between SAP and the GCP in the cloud, there was a lot of work done there, especially around automation, around landscape management, so Llama. A lot of work that, again, is now available to everybody. Same with identity and access management and GRC. So all of those, we've made a lot of work together with SAP, and this is now available to everybody. Integration of BigQuery with BW. I think this is something I would highly encourage you to take a look at. Same with PaPM. So one of the things we're doing, for instance, just to give you an idea what we can do here, we're using MDG for master data, obviously. But instead of connecting all of the systems to MDG to see, hey, what is the new company code going on here? What we do is we use a feature in GCP called PubSub for publish and subscribe. And all the boundary systems that we have, they can just connect to these hooks and receive notification when there's a new piece of master data that they care about. So, and then they can already do something with it, maybe replicate the data or update when if it's an update. So there's a lot of integration pieces that could facilitate your work with other systems. Integration with machine learning, of course. Now SAP has a lot of data. What can you do with that data? Obviously, AI, ML would be interesting, and then Dialogflow just to make your end user interface a little bit more exciting. So in summary here, and what you could I think learn from our experience. You want to start with core principles. How do you make decisions? How do you agree on anything? That might be simple to say, but unless you have the right priorities, like do you want to go fast or do you want to do the right thing? Sometimes, depending on the project, those might be conflicting. So in our case, we really wanted to make sure that we don't want tech debt. Going back to standard, for instance, was something that was very important to us, and that was a core principle when we had to make decisions. You can combine S/4HANA on GCP, combine it with S/4 Public Cloud and Central Finance, and then you can use them as stepping stones for your finance transformation program. What was maybe surprising for some of our team members was that, system implementation today has less to do with coding than configuration, especially if you go back to standard. If you think about it, if you go back to standard, there's not a lot of write-ups and custom code. It's a lot going to be configuration, right? So it changes a lot of things. For instance, you might hire less developers and more system analysts. So that's something that is very important to keep in mind, especially when you change different platforms. There might be different things. I know we said get everything out of the box and back to standard, but using standard tools in a different way is something that you can do. For instance, how we use BigQuery together with SAP. We use also SRT with BRF Plus. So the integration I was showing is combining SRT with Business Rules Framework to make all those mapper translations. So it's all standard tools, but when you put them together, it's very rare to put them this way together. I insisted on change management. I think this is clear now. It's a very important topic. When you make decisions, it's a lot easier to have a smaller, dedicated group to look at the problem, come up with options, recommendations, and then go back to the bigger group instead of having everybody put their hand in the kitchen. Co-innovation it's a lot of work. It takes a lot of time, but if you have the right relationship with the SAP product team, you can do a lot, and it's really priceless, right? It really gets you to a new level of results. And for us, I think our consulting partners were really surprised about our way of asking tough questions and challenging the status quo and building future-proof. Examples here are when we were looking at the cost center design, a few consultants told us, well, that's how everybody else is doing it, and we would not take that as an answer. Like, we really don't care how everybody else is doing it. What does it mean for me, and why should I be doing it this way? So very important to push back and see why I don't understand, and then tell me why it makes sense for me, as opposed to everybody. I want to pass it back to my colleagues here.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Julien. Julien, can you hear me clearly? I just want to confirm. Or Rohan?
Yes, Narayan, I can hear you.
All right. Well, Julien, thanks very much. Right. Thanks very much for narrating. Alphabet's finance transformation story. Obviously, all of that running on Google Cloud infrastructure. What we have is basically what you see on your screen is a subset of SAP customers, all referenceable, who are already running on Google Cloud today, right? One of the things is, I've engaged with a few of them over here, right? So, for example, you see Ocean Network Express, which is based in Singapore. You see SIG, which is Seven Indonesia Group Logistics, based in Indonesia. Bluebird Group, again, based in Indonesia. They're all basically, customers who are running their SAP applications on Google Cloud. Every time the question is asked, why did you actually choose Google Cloud? I think the answers are very similar to what Julien has actually narrated, right? I guess it always goes back to the fact that SAP's strength always has been with business processes, and we actually love the flavor that they actually bring in, the robustness that they actually bring in, just from an end-to-end business process perspective. But what we actually like about Google Cloud is the fact that we are able to leverage probably the best cloud data platform that exists, and we are able to kind of extend the benefits of these business processes in the form of transformation that we require into being a data-driven enterprise. So almost all these customers that you actually see on the list over here not only run their SAP applications on Google Cloud, but they most definitely are making investments into our data infrastructure as well, right? So you hear the term BigQuery. Of course, it's a little more than BigQuery. This is basically technology that's powering all of the Google products, right? So it's literally our way of actually bringing in technology that's managing all the data that kind of end up on Google searches to be able to kind of leverage by enterprises for searching across their enterprise wide data itself, right? So again, I guess it's just a testimony to the fact that the names you see over here, if Google Cloud is a platform that you are interested in kind of running your SAP applications with, I really genuinely hope and pray that you also consider being data-driven enterprise as being part of your entire charter itself, right? If we can move to the next slide, Julien. I'm not going to delve into the details of this. I just realized that yes, there are some SAP technical folks on this call as well. This is a reference architecture. It's a pretty detailed architecture. This is again published on the if you go to the Google Cloud public site itself. I'm happy to kind of share that link on the chat also, where you can actually find all the public documentation, right? But what I want to kind of assure is that we have SAP certified machines. We have a fully certified reference architecture that we work with SAP, which supports high availability, which supports disaster recovery, and we are happy to actually have a much more detailed conversation on how this might actually look for your environment itself, right? So that's just I'm not getting into details of this. Just want to assure you that we have a very robust, solid architecture, leveraging some of the best services within Google Cloud to implement a highly available and a disaster resilient SAP solution on Google Cloud. All right, with that, I'll probably have Rohan actually go through the rest of the content.
Yeah. Thanks, Narayan, and thanks, Julien. So, hello, folks. So till now we have heard about the kind of transformation what we have done Google-wide for our financial processes as well as other processes. So, and Narayan also touched about our certification that we have done with SAP to give infrastructure for SAP or even other services. But if you are evaluating Google Cloud from India perspective, this is the slide for you. Okay. So first is currently we are the only hyperscaler in India who has two regions in two different seismic zones, and each region has multiple availability zone. Now, availability zone is like a failure domain. Failure domain in the sense, if one failure domain goes down, that can be power, that can be cooling, or any other infrastructure issues. The other failure domain is insulated from that failure, right? So that's what the availability zone is all about. So currently, Google is the only hyperscaler in India with which you can have all sorts of these architectures, which are mainly critical for SAP ERP systems in India, right? Now, the other differentiator, again, from India perspective, what we have is currently Google Cloud is the only hyperscaler where a live customer is running 12 TB virtual machine. So 12 TB is for HANA, and it's again comes in a virtual form. The benefit of consuming this resource in a virtual is you can manage it with code. You can switch up, switch down, and you can do all sort of. You can take the benefits of a cloud. That typically whatever we hear that what are the benefits of cloud, you can consume those benefits better when those resources are available in a virtual form, and that's what we are doing it for a largest of machine currently in India. And the other sort of it, and because of these reasons, not just because of these two differentiators, but because of the other reasons what we covered till now, there are some marquee customers who have selected Google Cloud for their SAP deployments. And I just picked a subset of that just to highlight that there are one of the largest conglomerates in India, not just in India, even in Bangladesh, they are running their ERP on Google Cloud, right? Now, what is it that we offer as a Google Cloud? If I want to summarize in one single slide, what are the differentiators or what are the value that we add apart from the information what you heard from Julien? So this is one single slide. So first point is secure network, right? So Google has built a dedicated network for Google itself. It's a very deep and high throughput fiber network what we have laid out throughout the globe. And it is it's a very time tested and battle hardened network, because it's the same network that is used by YouTube, Google Search, all the Google public-facing utilities or tools that we use, it's based on the same network, right? And there are other subtle nuances of these networks as well. With whenever we engage in future, we can introduce those nuances as well. That why it differentiates us. Then the other aspect and other again important aspect, and as we see that cloud is pay as you go or scale up, scale down. But we have done one thing differently even in this scale up or pay as you go model. We have a concept called as custom VM, right? So typically whenever for SAP systems, generally you might have seen shapes like 8 vCPU 64 GB RAM or 4 vCPU 32 GB RAM, like it comes in a typical shapes. But if your workload demands a very odd type of shape, let's say 6 vCPU and 73 GB RAM. Now this is not a standard configuration which is available out of the blue. But in case of Google Cloud, you can do that customization so that you are only deploying infrastructure which is required for your workload and you're only paying for that. So that's a one step above how we can go pay as you go concept. The third and most important, again, it's a unique differentiator to Google Cloud, is we call it as a live migration. So live migration is a concept where we have algorithms in our data centers. They keep on tracking the infrastructure in backend. So if they realize a particular infrastructure is going to fail in some time, proactively, it will lift your VM, virtual machine, which is running on top of that infrastructure, and it will shift it to a healthy host. Now, this lifting and shifting that happens in a live way, that's why we call it as a live migration. So during this transaction, as in during this live migration event, your end users can still continue to work. They won't feel any disruption, or neither you will get a notice from Google saying that we are doing live migration, you need to take a downtime. So because of which we can maintain our hardware without you taking any downtime. So that improves the native high availability out of the box. And there is no extra charge, no extra configuration, nothing. It is baked into the infrastructure by default for you. And the last and foremost, which again, I would like to build on what Julien has just said about innovation. So internally, Google has a DNA of innovation, and we try to bring in more and more products which can solve industry use cases, but with little bit innovation differently. Now, as Julien has talked about multiple products like BigQuery, PubSub, how we can connect all this together. But apart from that, we have also gone one step ahead in AI and as well as machine learning, where even if you don't know how to write machine learning code, if you don't know R language, Python, you can still achieve machine learning by writing SQL queries, right? And again, that works well with SAP as well. So these are the 4 points which I think that Google Cloud can help you with if you are evaluating Google Cloud for your cloud journey. Yeah, and these are our contact points. If you have any questions, either you can post it in chat today, or you can also reach out to us on these email IDs, and we would be glad to help you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
thanks, Rohan, for doing that. I've started a poll just so that we understand whether the session today was useful, and if you would like to know more about topics like this in the future as well. So while the polls kick in, I think let's take 1 or 2 questions. I know that we are already on top of the hour. So if someone wants to drop off, please feel free to do so. For people who have asked the questions, and I'm assuming that can the Google team stay online for a few more minutes?
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So the first question comes is around M&A. So maybe Amit, if you can also answer this question from an SAP point of view. So there is a customer who says that there is going to be a lot of M&A activity that they're going to experience in the near term. So the question is, if the acquired company does not have SAP, what's advisable in the short term and in the long term? Is it implement SAP in the acquired company or implement SAP Central Finance? Or and the second question in the same thing is, how does SAP Central Finance compare with BPC or BFC, which were also used for consolidation?
That's a great question. I love it. All right, so you have to be strategic. If you do a lot of M&A, it's possible that those M&As are there's different types of M&A. Typically, you could do the same business in a different country, for instance, or you could do a very different type of business if you do vertical integration, right? Now, in any case, you have a legal requirement, at least in the US and in Europe, within 90 days, you need financial consolidation of the new entity. To get to 90 days, you don't have 90 days to implement SAP, right? So what you typically do is a very high level integration, consolidation, and therefore the idea is to go directly to BPC or group reporting or whatever your consolidation system is, right? So right now, the quick and dirty solution is to only do financial consolidation. What you want to do is align at the company code level, potentially division and whatever you report on, right? So strategic first step, finance consolidation. Now, from then on, you could stay there, right? Because when you do M&A, you might be buying and selling companies, right? So that's the first. If you do this, you are now compliant with the law. Now you don't get all the benefits we want, right? So in order to get the benefits, you need to integrate the processes. And to integrate the processes, there's two things you can do. Either you only integrate at the financial transaction level. Maybe you want to have, if the customers are similar, right? You acquire a company within the same country with a slightly different business use case. So if they have the same customers, you want to have a single point of credit check. To do that, you need integration at the finance level. And this is where you want to do an integration with SLT, and you can do just all the finance pieces. And Central Finance helps a lot with that. It doesn't matter if the acquired company is SAP or non-SAP. All right. Then, if you really want to have a full integration, then you have two options. Either you merge the acquired company into the acquiring company, right? If it's a small get together, or you could do some processes with Central Finance, not all of them, but some of them. Or then you have to implement the whole ERP, right? So, for instance, let's say Google, which company has device and services. We have Nest, we have smart watches that we acquired from Fossil a while ago, and we just acquired Fitbit. If we want to have a merge strategy to do a single warehouse, for instance, or a single sales team that goes out to Best Buy and sells both of those equipments together, you need to be in the same ERP system, or you need to integrate with Central Finance, but you might have limitations in what you can do. For instance, you would have obviously different plans that you have to articulate between the two systems, right? So it gets a lot harder to be in different ERP systems if you want to have a full process integration. And I realized it was a 1 second question, it was a 5-minute answer, but I hope this is helpful.
Thanks. Amit, do you want to add anything to that?
No, Mukesh, I think nothing to add. But again, from a manager's perspective, one part is to get the numbers at one place, and then second part is how you can operationalize the data as quickly as possible. So this is where Central Finance comes into picture. And I think from Google perspective, they are using more on the BPC side, right, for consolidation. But we do have a group reporting solution which merges both layers into one picture. So I think that's a different conversation. But more than happy to have a 1:1 conversation with the desired customer, and we can explain it.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
The answer is it depends.
Yeah. So there is a question around your data transformation itself. So is the data transformation for historical data as well, which means the archived data? And what was the overall size of the data which is transformed through the landscape, the SLT?
That's a great question. So we had to define, one of those decisions was actually historical data and what do we do in there, right? For us, it was not an SAP system upgrade, right? We had a greenfield implementation. So we started from an empty box. So when you start from an empty box, you have to decide, how much do I carry over? Do I carry over 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, or everything, right? So in our case, we wanted to keep the system, the S4 operational system, as small as possible. So we migrated in the active S4 system, I think from 2019 on, something like that, right? So not a lot of data. Remember that we started the technical project in 2020. right? So we had a year and some, because then we wanted to do year-over-year comparison. What do you do with the historical data? Well, you have different options. The first one is actually to migrate into the S4 system. Then you carry a lot of weight that doesn't add a lot of value. The only reason you want to keep it most of the time is for legal and audits. So what we did is we carried over into the BW system, converted data up to, I think, 7 years, right? So we have now 7 years of data into the BW system. Now, what do we do with the rest? Well, it's hard for us as Google to say, we're going to get rid of it, right? It's like, Google loses data, it's kind of a problem, right? So, and we're constantly under scrutiny. So we always have questions going back to 10 or 15. Now, there was even recently a request back to 20 years ago, right? Like an asset you might have acquired or an employee you might have paid or something like that. So we have to keep our old system on ice, basically, turn it down as low as possible and keep it that way. So basically 3 levels of strategy: active data in the S4 system, a year plus, right? A year and then you start. BW system is, I think, 7 years, and then the rest stays in the old system the way it is. In terms of volume, I cannot share that data, but the records we had, if you can think about it, we had 8 million finance records per month, and that's just finance. So it's sizable, right? When Rohan talks about 12 terabyte machines, like we have some of them.
Thanks. So maybe last question before we kind of end this, because we are already 10 minutes over, which was, just give me a second, I'm trying to pull out the question. So this was a question around BigQuery.
Mm-hmm.
Is GCP BigQuery top up on HANA Analytics?
And so the way we implemented it, and we might want to go back to Narayan and Rohan for the very technical questions here, but the way we implemented it is that we replicate the BW data into BigQuery. The reason for this is that if imagine you had a direct connector from BigQuery into HANA, you would have more load on your BW system. That's not what we want, right? We want to push the load to another system, right? But maybe Narayan and Rohan, if you have more details here.
Sure. No, so the way we actually look at it, right? I mean, I'll probably just give the example of some of the customers that I spoke about, like Home Depot, for example, right? Home Depot runs BW BPC just like we do, but their use of BigQuery actually goes beyond just, say, the finance domain itself, right? For them, BigQuery essentially is kind of, you want to call it a data warehouse, you want to call it a data lake, but what they have is basically a plethora of use cases that are actually implemented across finance, across sales, across performance of their warehouses, and also a lot of IoT data as well, right? So the way we look at it, the analytics that basically require SAP data, all of that's kind of available within your SAP systems itself. The way customers actually prefer to implement BigQuery is to complement what you already have from an SAP solution offering perspective, and to actually bring in a lot of IoT data, probably data that's coming out from non-SAP applications, and BigQuery essentially becomes a repository where you can basically because it's petabyte scale and commercially extremely let's say attractive to implement, it goes way beyond the scope of just a few data domains.
That's a great point. I completely forgot, but you now bring me. That's exactly what we're doing. Right? We have all the actuals coming from SAP. They go from S4 to BW to BigQuery, but then the plan is actually coming from a non-SAP system. So we merge them in BigQuery. So that's exactly what we're doing. Just even if you stay within finance, for us, plan and actuals are coming from different systems.
Yep.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. We are 15 minutes on top, 12 minutes on top. So thank you, Julien, for staying. It should be already midnight for you. So good night for you. Have a good sleep.
Thank you. Had a great time. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And thanks everyone else for staying on. Take care.
Thanks,
And see
Mukesh,
you
for
next month
organizing.
again. Yeah.
And
Thanks,
thank you,
Mukesh.
Mukesh, for arranging this.
Thank you.
Yes,
Take
thanks,
care.
Mukesh. That was great.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you.
Mukesh, and thank you, team.
Thank you, Mukesh. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, team. Bye.
Bye.